Oh, what's this article from The Hill? Republicans push innovation as climate change solution? Wow, it's almost like Republicans were listening to everything I was saying. I was putting it out to the universe. And the Democrats should be, but probably aren't. Basically, for those that have seen my other videos, my official position is that the idea of a Green New Deal, it's not bad, right? The way the far left, Ocasio-Cortez and her other progressive Democrats are pushing it is probably a bad idea. But I do think it's fair to say investing in energy technology and innovation is an extremely good idea for so many reasons. You go to the left and you say, hey man, you want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And they're going to go, wow, that's great. And they're going to say, we'll vote for it. You go to Republicans and say, hey man, you want to expand the US economy, make us more competitive against China and other foreign interests, and reduce energy costs for factories and manufacturing in the US? They're going to be like, whoa, that sounds great. And I'm like, we got a win-win going on. Save the environment, better economy, more jobs, science, better living through technology. Now, unfortunately, the Democrats aren't supporting Ocasio-Cortez, and they keep pushing the most extreme versions of a Green New Deal. And this is what frustrates me. They're like, eliminate all carbon emissions in 10 years, otherwise the world ends. And I'm like, okay, look, I get it. You're worried about it. I actually agree. However, half the country disagrees. So you need to figure out a compromise. And look, there's people on the left saying, there's no compromise, it's over. And I'm like, okay, listen. If your choice is argue with them and they'll never agree with you and then nothing happens, or compromise and something starts today, maybe you should compromise and do your best to make sure this benefits all Americans. Otherwise, you see what happens in France with the Yellow Vests protests. That's what would happen, in my opinion, if Ocasio-Cortez pushes forth like this Green New Deal. You get people riding in the streets over the taxes and it's going to damage the economy. There's ways to get things done. So this is why I saw this story. I thought it's fascinating. Republicans push for innovation, and I'm like, combine the two, right? Innovation. Well, let's read what they say. Let's see what they got going on. GOP lawmakers are increasingly turning to a new refrain for their position on climate change, calling for innovation as the policy solution. Many Republicans have seemingly settled on innovation as their primary position to counter progressive Democrats, who have grown louder in their calls for a Green New Deal, with its emphasis on renewable electricity, and as the United Nations and federal government issue reports saying time is running out to dramatically cut emissions. I want to point out though, like, look, as somebody I'm concerned about climate change. I'm concerned about the environment. How many times are you going to tell us every 3 years? Oh, this is it. Time's up. Oh, time's up now. It's like every year I hear that time is up now, or we're running out of time. Dude, we've been running out of time for like 15 years. Okay, so I understand it may be that we literally are running out of time. But it doesn't seem like they actually know what they're talking about. And that's one of the big problems, especially for me. Innovation has a critical role, Senator Cory Gardner told The Hill. If you look at the reductions in emissions as a result of shifting to natural gas and away coal and other fuels, it's had a dramatic impact on emissions. Endorsing innovation has very few obvious political downsides for the GOP. It's not controversial, and it helps Republicans paint a contrast with Democratic ideas they argue are controversial and expensive. But critics say Republicans are being disingenuous and using innovation to mask their opposition to more aggressive climate change policies. Those critics say innovation alone isn't sufficient to cut greenhouse gas emissions to the level that scientists say is necessary. Let me just stop you right here and say this. Listen, Trump is not wrong when he says China won't abide by these rules. You have other countries. It's not just the US. We do produce a metric, like, I was going to swear, a majority, okay. We produce more than most countries in terms of emissions, okay? So I can recognize that. But you also need to realize that even if we stopped everything, that wouldn't have that big of a dent for the most part. So innovation makes sense, and maybe compromise, so we can do something. But what ends up happening is the far left wants this extreme no carbon emissions in 10 years, which is like a radical transformation, and it's like throwing, man, it could disrupt the economy to an extreme degree. The Republicans saying only innovation, that's actually still better than like an extreme position. But I think they should move together a little bit. Innovation obviously makes a ton of sense, and there's epic things that can be done. Man, I want to go to Mars, you know? Let's invest more in technology, science, and research. And you ever play Civilization? You know, I play Civilization, I just dump everything into science. You know why? Because when your science is really high, you just dominate all of the other civilizations. Because look, if your guys have nuclear missiles and they're still using bow and arrows, you get whatever you want. You win, right? So there's clear innovation does make sense. The left should. I wish people would stop being so, I don't know, just bickering so much. And the left treat it like a business transaction. Okay, here's what we want. The right says, well, here's what we want. So, okay, I'm willing to give up these things for you to come forward. Oh, no, that's not enough. Okay, you work towards it. It's called negotiating. Innovation grew into GOP's favor this year on the time that the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its October report warning that the world had about 10 years left to dramatically cut emissions or face some of the worst consequences of global warming, like sea level rise and water shortages. Senator Ben Sasse said on Fox News Sunday that innovation and not new regulations should be the country's response to climate change. While I don't disagree, I think it should be a little bit in the direction of regulation. I do, because how do you prevent companies from damaging the economy, damaging the environment? Just incentivizing them not to doesn't necessarily work. I'm not saying over-regulate and just come down with feds and just point guns at them. No, I think regulation can be done in clever ways that incentivize a net benefit instead of a net negative. And so ultimately what it comes down to is how can we provide, tax cuts are really good, tax breaks are a really good example. Hey, if you reduce emissions, we'll give you a tax break. Instead of doing what are they proposing, a carbon tax? If you produce carbon, we're going to tax you. No, do the opposite. We'll give you a tax break for producing less. Then you've literally got a CEO going you mean to tell me we can save $1 million if we reduce the amount of emissions? How much fuel can we save? Because now you're saving money on fuel and you're saving money on taxes. That makes sense, right? I think a conversation, look, I'm not an expert. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe these ideas have been tried. I'm just saying compromise, right? What the U.S. needs to do is participate in a long-term conversation about how you get to innovation. And it's going to need to be a conversation, again, that doesn't start with alarmism. But that starts with some discussion of the magnitude of the challenge, the global elements to it, and how the U.S. shouldn't just do this as a feel-good measure, but some of innovative proposal. Listen, you can't just snap your fingers like the far left wants and say we're changing the economy, we're changing all of these things, because you'll end up with yellow vests protests, right? And the people got out and they were angry. You need to make sure that what you're proposing is a net benefit for everybody. Granted, there's going to be fault. People are going to get hurt no matter what. But the idea is we want to make everything better. So it can't be jarring. It has to make sense. And I'm going to read just the conclusion of this article. So I got another article I want to point out real quick. So they say, Eric Pica, president of Friends of Earth, said the GOP shouldn't get any credit for pushing innovation. The innovation framework is an interesting way of Republicans saying, maybe we believe in climate change, but no, we don't have the technology to deal with it. And so they have to wait to act. In the end, Pica said if the GOP can't back aggressive climate policies like a transition to 100% renewable electricity, as called for in the Green New Deal proposal, it's still essentially climate denial. And this is, just come on, man. Throw somebody a bone. Recognize that other people disagree with you, and you can't just force people to do things. However, this article was on Reddit that I found fascinating. I'm not necessarily going to read through it, but I want to bring up the point. It's from High Country News. I have no idea what that is, but they say, is nuclear energy the key to saving the planet? A new generation of environmentalists is learning to stop worrying and love atomic power. Yes, I used to work for Greenpeace. And then I started researching about Greenpeace. And it turns out one of the founders of Greenpeace is an advocate for nuclear energy. Because although there have been some pretty big disasters, like Fukushima, for instance, Chernobyl, those aren't indicative necessarily of nuclear energy, but for one, Japan, it was a tsunami and it was a catastrophic failure that no one really expected. All the fail-safes broke, and it's really bad. And it's a wide-scale disaster, which could be a big problem. But if you think climate change is literally going to end the world, maybe you should start adopting nuclear energy, because overall, most nuclear plants are fine. No problems. Some of them have problems, don't get me wrong, some of them leak, for sure, that happens. But how many deaths in the nuclear industry compared to the coal industry, the petroleum industry? Petroleum engineering, like working on the rigs, is one of the highest mortality rates for any job. So more people are dying for fossil fuels, and we got the carbon emissions. I think at the very least, if you think nuclear energy is bad, we can still say, but it's slightly better than fossil fuels, right? Not only that, it's got a tremendous return on energy investment. The energy output for nuclear energy is massive. And I think one of the big problems I've experienced with environmentalists is that they've opposed nuclear energy for so long, and I never really understood why. They would talk about 3 Mile Island in Chernobyl and Fukushima, and I'd be like, yeah, but are you tracking the oil spills too? Are you tracking the coal mining collapses, disasters, the people who die? Like, come on, man, those disasters exist on the other side as well. Let's not focus on the negative. Like, we can actually look at the stats and be like, overwhelmingly, we should talk about nuclear energy. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are scared. A lot of people are emotional. For a while, they were relating nuclear energy to nuclear weapons, and they still kind of do in the press. So you essentially have this story talking about how nuclear energy is starting to be adopted by young people on the left because there's zero emissions. It's steam. Now, there's talk about how do we recycle the nuclear waste, and I'm not an expert. A lot of people probably know more than I do, but I think they've had tremendous developments and advancements in how to recycle nuclear waste, use it, store it, and just generally dispose of it correctly. But if you were to say to me that we have a problem with nuclear waste, my answer would just be like, okay, let's figure it out. Innovation. I'll agree with the Republicans on this one. And I also don't disagree with the left for the most part. But I think the issue is are you going to have a conversation? Are you going to actually try and bridge the gap and figure out how we solve a problem together? And that means you can't just go into like a bakery and be like, I demand, a chicken sandwich, and the guy's like, dude, we make muffins, and you're like, we need chicken sandwiches, and I refuse to compromise. What if you went there and said, I'll tell you what, I'll bring up the chicken, you just make me the bun, and right, you compromise. Anyway, I don't know. I found it fascinating that I've been talking about the Green New Deal for a little bit, and now we're hearing this rhetoric from the Republicans. So I think this is good news. I think this is really good news. Maybe not the best news for everybody, but I think ultimately the solution should be one of two things. The left and the right are grumbling and upset because we've come to a compromise that no one's happy about, but at least better than nothing. Or both sides are happy because we're helping the environment to the best of our abilities, and we're bettering the economy and expanding the U.S. and making jobs and all that stuff. And I think that can be done. Anyway, more videos to come. Stick around, and I'll see you in a few minutes.